They say no one survives a winter like that alone. But she did, or at least she tried. A widow 50 winters behind her. No shoes, no food, no family left to call her name. Just one set of footprints through the snow until they stopped. Out on the edge of the Lakota Trail, she collapsed. And for a moment it seemed that was how her story would end. Quiet, unnoticed, like so many women before her. But someone was watching. He was a hunter, a man used to silence and snow. The kind folks in town called strange, maybe even dangerous. But when he saw her crumpled, their arms blue breath shallow, he didn't ask who she was. He didn't ask what mistakes she'd made. He just took off his coat and wrapped it around her like a vow. And that's where it began. Not with a rescue, but with a recognition. Because what he saw wasn't just a woman half frozen from the world's neglect. He saw someone still holding on to dignity, even when the cold had taken everything else. What happened after that? What she did once she warmed her hands by his fire? That's the part no one saw coming. A stove was lit, a life rebuilt, and somewhere between snowstorms and silence, two people who thought they were done with love learned they had one more story to write. If you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever wondered if it's too late to be chosen, this story is for you. Because out here, even in the deepest winters, kindness still walks on two legs. What happened after she put on his coat will stay with you. Stick around to find out what she built from the warmth he gave, because it only gets better from here. The wind had no mercy that December. Not for Clara Belle Royce, and certainly not for the trail beneath her feet, vanished now beneath miles of white that didn't care what or who it buried. Clara hadn't eaten in 3 days. Her last sip of water had come from a cracked mason jar half filled with melted snow she prayed wasn't laced with wood ash. Her husband had died in October. The farm had folded in November. And by December, there was only her. Well, her and a pair of ruined boots she'd given to a boy back in Dodge. His cough had sounded worse than hers. She'd wrapped her feet in flour sacks. One tore halfway up the ridge. Now the soles of her feet were purple and slick with broken ice. Still she kept walking, because that's what people do when they've already lost everything. They keep walking as if maybe sorrow can be outrun if you just don't stop. Clara had once been pretty. She'd once been chosen, though not kindly. Marriage for her was not a gentle promise, but a trade. A meal for a ring, silence for a bed. But she'd still said thank you, still wiped dishes clean, still offered prayers for a man who never answered to a name that wasn't Sir. And when he passed, no one wept, not even the land. So she left, not in defiance, but because the house no longer had a heartbeat, and she figured if death had come for him in that rocking chair, then it was only a matter of time before it came for her too. By the third day of walking, Clara began to hear things. Sometimes her name soft like it came from under a blanket. Other times the low bellow of a cow she hadn't owned in years. The world shimmered in and out like bad glass. But still, she kept walking. She didn't cry, didn't beg. There was a quiet dignity in the way she moved, like a woman who knew shame too intimately to wear it openly anymore. Then came the tree line. Tall pines with snow-burdened shoulders and trunks dark as coffee. She reached for one as her legs buckled. Her palms sank into powder. And finally, after 51 years of bending, of yielding, of yes, Sir Clara Belle Royce, collapsed into the snow. No shoes, no home, no reason left. The wind swept over her with a sound like breath leaving a body. She closed her eyes. Maybe she thought this is just how winter ends things. Quiet, cold, unnoticed. But before the dark swallowed her whole, she felt it a weight over her shoulders. Wool, warm, heavy with scent she didn't recognize, cedar smoke. Elk, her vision blurred. A man knelt beside her, voice low, like a stream under ice. "You're not dead yet, Ina Weagley. Come now." Strong arms lifted her gently, as if she mattered. She didn't speak, didn't trust herself not to break the moment if she did. And that, dear listener, was the first time in years someone touched Clara with gentleness. Not as a burden, not as something to claim, but simply because she was still alive. Would you stay to see what happens when the snow begins to melt? The cabin was tucked into a cradle of birch trees halfway up the ridge. Small, yes, but not mean. Its roof sloped low like it bowed to the mountain winds. Smoke curled from a chimney made of river stone, and behind its single window, a lamp flickered soft, amber light. When Clara Belle Royce woke, her fingers were warm. Not hot, but not numb either. A quilt covered her old stitched with care, full of mismatched patches and memory. Beneath it, her feet were wrapped in muslin and resting on a hot brick. She blinked, then turned her head slowly. The pain was sharp but real, and real meant she hadn't died. Across the room sat a man, not young, not old either. He looked carved more than grown cheekbones, high, shoulders wide, eyes, the color of steep rivers before spring thaw. He didn't speak right away, just nodded, then said gently, "You walked too far on nothing. Your blood was turning to snow." His voice had the calm of someone used to silence. Not afraid of it, just, respectful. Clara tried to sit up, but he lifted a hand. "Rest. You're safe here." She didn't ask where here was. Didn't ask who he was either. What mattered more was the way he'd said safe, like he meant it. Later that night, he gave her broth. Rabbit and sage. She sipped it slow-mouthed, trembling more from memory than cold. "My name is Wakasa To," he said. "Means blue man for the hills where I was born." Clara blinked at him. "It's a kind name." He smiled softly. "It was my mother's." For 3 days he said little else. Only tended the fire, checked her bandages, left tea near her elbow without asking if she wanted any. That third evening she finally said her own name aloud. Clara Belle Royce. It felt strange on her tongue, as if saying it again gave it weight. Wikasa didn't ask why she was in the woods or why she had no shoes. He just nodded and added another log to the fire. But she told him anyway. Told him of her husband, of the loneliness that came after, of walking north until her feet bled and her name felt too heavy to carry. When she was done, Wikasa only said, "Grief sits quiet until the wind stirs it. You walked into a storm and didn't fall." Clara looked away. "I did fall." He looked at her feet. "Yes, but not for good." That night, snow began to fall again. But inside the cabin, Clara slept not like a woman escaping the world, but like someone who had been gathered in. But what happens when the thaw brings not just spring, but memory? Spring came with a hush in the mountains. Not a burst, but a slow unraveling. Snow melted from the branches, one drop at a time, and the creek behind the cabin, once silent, began to murmur again. Clara could walk now. Her feet, once blistered and raw, were steady in the soft moccasins Wakasa had made for her. He didn't mention the hours it must have taken, or the way he'd shaped the soles with care. He just handed them to her one morning, nodded, and said, "They'll carry you better than Frost did." By the fourth week, Clara took to gathering wood. She swept the floor without being asked, sang under her breath while stirring cornmeal. But the silence inside her hadn't healed, not fully. It still rose up in the evening when the sky turned lavender, and Wikasa's eyes stayed too long on the fire. One night after supper, she spoke low. "I had a son once." Wikasa didn't look surprised, just waited. "Before James, that was my husband before the miscarriage. His name was Thomas." Her voice cracked at the edge. "I lost him at 2 months, but I still dream of his hands." Wikasa looked at her the way some men look at stars, like they know they'll never reach them, but still find comfort trying. The next day, Clara heard hooves, 2 riders, coming from the South Ridge. She recognized the shape of the taller one even before she saw his face. Ephraim Boone, her late husband's brother, and the one who had told her not 6 months past, "You ain't a wife anymore, Clara, just dead weight in my barn." Now here he was, boots polished, voice full of pretend sorrow. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "They told me you'd frozen stiff. Guess you got lucky." Wikasa stood still, his hands open, his voice calm. "You're not welcome here." Ephraim smiled. "Relax, Redskin. I ain't here to fight. Just here to collect what ain't mine, but ain't his either." He nodded toward Clara. "You left debts behind, Clara. Land, tools, animals sold for your bread. You belong back where you came from." Clara's knees went soft, not from fear, but from rage. She straightened, looked Ephraim square in the face, and for the first time in years her voice didn't shake. "I belonged to no one before. And I won't start now. Ephraim laughed cold and short. We'll see what the county says. He turned and rode off, but his words stayed behind like poison. That night, Wicasa poured tea without a word. Clara didn't drink. What if he comes back? She asked. Wicasa looked at the window, then at her. Then he'll find two people, not one. But still Clara couldn't sleep, because some ghosts don't knock. They crawl under the door with the wind. When the law comes calling, will Clara stand or be stolen once more by the past? The county man came with papers. 2 weeks after Ephraim's visit, wore a gray coat with brass buttons and a mustache too proud for its own mouth. Clara heard his knock while she was washing her hands in a basin by the fire. Wicasa answered the door. Looking for a Mrs. Clara Boone, the man said, his boots tracked in slush and power. I have an order from the state. Her late husband's estate is under dispute. Technically, she's still married in the eyes of the county, even if he's buried in cold. She's needed for questioning. Wicasa stepped back not out of fear but precision, a quiet readiness. She's not property, he said. The man looked bored. She's a person of interest. Clara stood wiping her hands on her apron. I'll come, she said, but not alone. They rode to the station house on borrowed horses, Clara beside Wicasa the whole way, her spine straight, her eyes dry. In town, whispers swirled like dirt and wind. She looks older than I remember. She was always odd, wasn't she? I heard she ran off barefoot into the snow. But Clara didn't lower her head. She entered the station and gave her name, sat through questions, signed what needed signing, spoke the truth simple and unvarnished. My husband beat me, then left me with debts he had no right to make. His brother tried to sell me like a heifer past birthing. The clerk blinked, wrote slowly. In the end, they gave her a paper release of claim. Her name returned. Her body no longer attached to land or debt or Boone blood. She stepped outside and exhaled. Wicasa waited by the hitching post. She held the paper out to him like a lantern. Guess I'm free, she said. He looked at her for a long while, then handed her a piece of cedar bark carved with two simple words. Stay if you want. She closed her eyes, then tucked it into the pocket of the coat he once gave her. That night, she pulled out a small piece of cloth, something she'd stitched in the weeks after arriving. An old torn dress she'd hemmed into a curtain. She hung it in the cabin window, not for shade, but for beauty, the kind that says a woman lives here, and she is not hiding. But even with freedom in her hands, is Clara ready to believe she belongs? Wicasa began leaving the cabin more often once spring rolled in. He said little about where he went, just that he had things to mend. He would saddle the pony with dried berries, rope, and hand tools. Sometimes he'd be gone a day, sometimes 3. Clara never asked. But in the growing stillness of his absence, old fears returned. Not like fire, but like fog, slow, suffocating, familiar. Maybe he was drifting. Maybe he regretted taking her in. Maybe she'd misread the silence between them, mistaking shelter for affection. She tended the hearth, hung her wash with care, sang soft lullabies to herself at dusk, though there were no children to hear. And when she stitched aprons, curtains, a pouch for Wicasa's cedar pieces, she stitched in a prayer she couldn't quite name. On the 4th morning, without him, a boy arrived. Lakota, about 11, with eyes too wise for their youth. He held a small pouch. My uncle said to give you this. Inside, bark carvings. One read, You are not forgotten. Another, I am making room. And one more, there is no hurry, woman of storms. Clara closed her eyes, letting the message warm the place where doubt had begun to nest. But just as her heart loosened, a rider came from the east. It was Ephraim Boone, back from nowhere riding a different horse, but the same twisted smile. I heard you weren't dead, he said from his saddle, and I hear you've been keeping company. Clara didn't flinch. She stood in the doorway like it was her altar. You have no say here. Ephraim spit in the snow. Law says you're still married in parts, and that man, he's not your kind. Behind him, 2 more men lingered, men who didn't look like they came to reason. She said nothing, just stepped back inside and shut the door, then sat down with her sewing fingers trembling but deliberate. If he returned, she'd be ready, and she wouldn't be alone. That night, Wicasa returned, with furs, with dried elk meat, with another carved word, soon. Clara met him in the doorway, her breath visible in the night air. and said the bravest thing she'd spoken in years: "I don't want to lose what we haven't even begun." But with Ephraim lurking and old rules clawing at her freedom, could this fragile new start survive? Will Clara be forced back into the chains she just broke, or is the mountain strong enough to protect her heart? The storm arrived in the form of boots, not thunder, not wind, just men with hands too quick and voices that didn't know softness. Ephraim came back at dawn. Clara had just lit the hearth. She hadn't braided her hair yet, still wore Wikasa's worn blanket over her shoulders like a shield. Ephraim didn't knock. He pushed the door open like he still owned something, like his name still had weight in her world. "I'm taking you back," he said. "No good morning. No ask. Just claim." Clara stayed still. "There's nothing left back there," she said, voice flat as snowfall. "There's law," he muttered. "And there's decency," she replied. "You never knew one. I found the other." Then Wikasa stepped out from behind the curtain, barefoot, calm, but his presence felt like stone. "I don't take what doesn't choose," he said. Ephraim sneered. "This ain't your woman." Wikasa didn't flinch. "She is not a thing to be owned." Behind Ephraim, one of the riders shifted. The younger one. Maybe a cousin or hired gun. He looked nervous. Clara stepped between them, something she never would have done a year ago. "You gave me away," she told Ephraim. "Like baggage." Her voice was even, but her eyes were wild with life now. "I wasn't yours then. I'm not yours now. And I won't ever be yours again." The silence that followed was full. Sacred. Even Ephraim seemed unsure what to do with it. "Careful, Clara," he hissed. "You're acting like you matter." And Clara, sweet Clara, who used to fold into corners, just smiled. "I do." Ephraim rode off. The younger rider trailing behind, not looking back. They didn't leave threats. Only dust. And in their place, Wikasa built a second fire. One outside, beneath a cottonwood tree. He called it a new hearth, one they'd light together whenever fear tried to sneak back in. That night, as flames cracked and wind rustled old pine, Clara leaned into the man who never asked her to be less. "I never imagined I'd be safe like this," she whispered. "You were always worthy of it," he said. But would peace hold? Could love grow steady in land that once only gave her frost? Will the mountain keep them warm through the final winter? Or is there still one more test of heart ahead? By the time spring whispered her green into the pines, Clara had worn out the soles of her borrowed boots. Not from fleeing, from planting, from walking beside Wikasa to the stream gathering wild onions and sweet root, from chasing the goat she insisted on naming Buttons, from climbing the ridge just to see the thaw come in like honey over the hills. She'd never felt her legs so full, her arms so wanted, her smile so unhidden. Wikasa carved her a garden box, old pine sanded smooth. She planted herbs in it, lavender, pennyroyal, wild mint, called them her healing sisters. One evening they found a woman in the woods, tattered dress, blank eyes, holding a child with a cough too tight in his chest. She didn't speak, but Clara didn't need words. She just wrapped them both in Wikasa's old winter cloak, the same one he'd once draped over her shoulders. "Come in," she said. "You're not baggage here." That night Clara cooked rabbit stew, crushed herbs into the broth with the back of her wooden spoon, and held the little boy as he coughed himself to sleep. Wikasa watched from the doorway, soft-eyed. "You're making something here," he murmured. Clara nodded. "A place where no one is tossed away." By midsummer, folks began to visit. A widow from down the hill brought peaches. 2 orphan boys started helping Wikasa chop wood. A preacher offered to bless the homestead, but Clara kindly declined. "We've got spirit here already," she said. One crisp morning, Wikasa asked her to come walk the ridge. They stood under the hawk tree, the same one he'd found her beneath that first snow. He took her hand, not nervous, not trembling, just steady. "I never thought I'd have a partner," he said. "But if you'll walk with me, I'll walk all my days beside you." Clara didn't cry. She simply breathed in. The sun warmed her spine. The mountains no longer looked like walls but invitations. "Yes," she said, "and I'll never walk behind again." Sometimes love doesn't come loud. Sometimes it arrives in borrowed coats and stew pots, in the hush between 2 people who've already lost too much to play games. But when it comes quietly like that, it stays. And maybe that's the kind of ending we all deserve. The kind that feels like a beginning, Would you like to hear more stories like Clara's? And maybe that's how real love begins, not with fireworks or fine words, but with a coat, a fire shared, a quiet man who notices what others throw away, and a woman who, despite everything, kept breathing, hoping, walking. We don't always get to choose what breaks us, but sometimes we do get to choose what heals us. And healing doesn't always come wrapped in grand gestures. Sometimes it's just someone keeping the stove warm until we're ready to sit beside it. If Willa's story reminded you of someone, maybe even yourself, let it be a gentle reminder. You're never too old, too lost, or too far gone to be chosen again, to be seen, to be warmed back to life. Out here on the frontier and in life, kindness still makes it through the cold. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to None, Wild West Saga, for more quiet, redemptive tales that honor strength, second chances, and the love that finds us later in life. And now I'd love to hear from you. Did this story remind you of anyone from your own life? Would you like to hear more stories like this one? Drop a comment below. Your voice matters here. And as always, thank you for spending a few quiet moments with us. We'll be right here by the fire waiting for next time.